Good evening and welcome to the ninth episode of Binge-worthy Podcast. Welcome back. I am your co-host G. Oliver here with Nate Couser here
Hey,
on
hey, hey.
Binge-worthy Pod. Hey, what's up, Nate?
Good, and you?
All right. So here on Binge-worthy Podcast, if you are new, we review and highlight the historical, social, and cultural connections in film and television. And tonight we have a very, very special episode. Uh, Big fan of this property. I believe Nate, you a big fan? You a
I
fan?
really am. I just literally I watched it like on and off as it was coming on live in terms of the seasons, but
Uh-huh.
I actually sit down and like
Just
over the course of maybe like 3 days or it probably was like a week. I just watched it
ain't
from
got caught up.
season. Yeah, I just got caught up in the confusing thing about this series is there have been a couple other series or movies or other TV shows that kind of take from what we saw in certain seasons, like Ratchet
Uh-huh.
and um, Norman, the Bates Hotel.
Bates Hotel.
And there was another one I was watching that was kind of along the lines of one of the seasons. So of
Mm-hmm.
course, the Bates Hotel was one of the episodes, and then Ratchet was kind of mimicking, I guess, because
Season
it was
two.
the same, right? Because it was the same
Mm-hmm.
character, and it kind of followed the whole Asylum type of feel.
Yeah.
So people were definitely getting their piggyback off of with this with
What the
American
show
Horror
did.
Story, right?
Yeah.
So I
And
was already watching them, and then I saw as I was watching the season, I was like, "Are these all connected?" Because I'm literally just watched. I think the Bates Hotel had 3 seasons, so I just watched those, and I watched all of Ratchet. That I think only had 1 season so far, but
mm,
I was watching them like, was this planned like this, or was it a
right.
part of the?
I think we'll get into that. So
Right.
we kind of got a little hit of ourselves. So like for anyone who's listening in, the topic tonight is American Horror Story. All right, the
Mhm.
show, and we're gonna talk about the show up until this point in its entirety. So
Right.
we're dedicating this whole ninth episode to American Horror Story, which, in my opinion, is a turning point for television for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it definitely is. It was a very interesting to watch each season kind of be a show in and of itself. But I loved how characters overlapped in certain seasons. I think it was a game changer to have Kathy Bates and Angela Bassett
In one
um,
season,
in one season, but
in the
right, but
first
they,
season.
yeah, but they were in a couple, right, in the first
No, well, I
season,
mean, like when they both entered the show in the
right,
same season.
as
That was a
movie
yeah.
stars doing TV. So
Hmm.
this was I think Kathy Bates had did TV before, but this was them coming down to TV. So you knew that this series was gonna be something that was gonna last. And the
Hmm.
fact that they had these two powerhouses mixed with a lot of other great first time actors and actors that you've seen here and there.
Oh
But
yeah.
and it was a I can't remember the other lady's name. She played the mother of and I'll get her name, but it was a lot of names that you were used to seeing, but to
Hmm.
see them all in this element, um, every season was I didn't catch the theme because I
Hmm.
didn't really watch it that often. So when I would like stick my head in and like season 2 or season 4, and I was like,
Hmm.
what the hell is going on? Like this not what happened in season 1. But
Yeah.
then I realized, oh, okay, each one of them is its own story, but they're
Hmm.
all interconnected in some overlapping way, whether
Right.
they're in the facility that was in present day that was something else back in the 50s or something. But it was very interesting. I liked this is what I like when we were talking about seasons that keep going or a short. I
Hmm.
love when you could just watch something and you can really you can get engulfed in just one season of it, and then the next season is something totally different. I like
Yeah.
that. I like episodics, but I love the way that they did it this way because everything was still interconnected in some way,
Right.
you know. And the historians has really like if you go to YouTube, you see all these um different podcasts based on this series, and they were really
Hmm.
dissecting the timeline and the historical elements, and it was a lot. So I was overwhelmed kind of researching for today's show, but it was pretty cool. I really liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've enjoyed most of American Horror Story. So for those who don't know, American Horror Story came out in 2011. It is still currently running. I think they did take a break because
Hmm.
of COVID. The last season was last year, 2019. But it is still currently on air. So there is a 10th season coming.
Okay.
Um, they are 9 seasons in,
Right.
103 episodes, debuted in 2011 on FX.
Hmm.
And I could be wrong about this, but I will say I think this is where American Horror Story was where I started really taking notice of FX and some of the
The station itself.
riskier the station itself. And
Hmm.
I could be wrong about that. I'm trying to think what else came on FX that predates American Horror Story that I would have been a fan of.
Now
Um,
this is like years ago on FX, but FX used to be it wasn't necessarily a throwaway channel, but it was
mhm.
like some of the odd things that you would want to watch.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like it was one of those channels. Like I I'm not sure how much of
It was
uh
like a catch-all.
a
It was a little
path,
bit of
right?
everything.
Yeah, like a little bit of everything, and then they started getting into like scripted drama, right? Like they
Yeah.
started producing their own scripted drama, and I had to double check, but I'm pretty sure I know that I'm not gonna say that American Horror Story was the first in that line, but it was
It was
where
the
that
biggest.
was where the station itself caught my attention, right? And FX has gone on to produce some great stuff
Mhm.
um, since American Horror Story. Um,
It wasn't anything that was really outstanding because if initially that channel was in one of the newer channels, but it was like a catch-all. They did some like TV shows, some movie. It was just a little bit of everything. It didn't really
mhm,
have like a specific theme to it, but I think
yeah.
that was one of the biggest things that they probably did to date. They had some good
Mhm.
things, but
All right,
it wasn't
so we got 9 seasons to choose from, right? So I figured we could start like this. I'm gonna name all 9 seasons
okay.
by their title, and then I want you to tell me which one is your personal favorite. So season one, starting with season one, is entitled Murder House. Then we had American Horror Story Asylum, American Horror Story Coven. After Coven came Freak Show, Hotel, Roanoke, Cult, Apocalypse, and 1984. Which season is your personal favorite?
Now I'm it's a toss up between the is this season 4 the Freak Show
Season four was Freak Show.
and Coven. I
Okay.
think I just love the I love Cassie Bates' character in Coven. So I
Okay.
just and Marie Laveau. That was the introduction of
Hmm.
Marie Laveau into the series. And I
Okay.
love that historical New Orleans kind of feel of it. Well, it was
Yeah.
in New Orleans, but yeah.
Coven was.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I said feel, but it was actually in New Orleans. But
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just like the
Coven
aspect
was
of it.
set in New Orleans. So my personal favorite, and after rewatching it, I'm still it's still my personal favorite. Asylum.
Okay.
Um, I thought Murder House was excellent, and then I thought Asylum just kind of like took it to a whole new level. Um, One of the things that I like about American Horror Story, and I like the acting in this is like top notch.
Mm-hmm.
I really, you'd be hard pressed to find a show that consistently, um, just the acting being that top notch. Like even in the seasons, some of the weaker seasons where I don't care so much for, I really can't. I really can't. It's not the acting, right? Like I usually, it's like the story I'm not really feeling. And then I think over time, I think even some of them started to feel a little bit redundant. Like at
Mm-hmm.
least in the sense that if you were a fan, you kind of, it almost kind of got a little bit predictable. Like you knew what to expect.
Right.
Um, but um, I think all of them are fairly decent. I don't really can't think of one that I would say like to somebody like don't watch that one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Evan Peters is a person like one of my favorite actors, and like I was introduced to him through this show.
Right.
We've seen Angela Bassett. We've seen the great Kathy Bates. But even Sarah Paulson, um, Zachary Quinto kind of got his start here. I think he was on American Horror Story before Heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just a really well acted show. It has always kind of, as an actor, I've always kind of been in awe of what they've done, like the individual performances in American Horror Story, especially, and then from season to season because they continuously bring the same actors back, playing different roles, different characters. So to watch them do that season in and season out, is pretty amazing to watch.
And what was even more amazing that you can tell they really thought out the entire run of the show. In every season, each season had some connection with something else in the rest of the seasons, and it was
Mhm,
just for them to cram a whole series into one season
mhm,
each time, and it still makes sense. It didn't seem like it was overkill. You didn't feel like any of the stories were necessarily cut short. It
mhm.
was really like it is a great it was great to me. Like I can't really complain about anything. I don't like some of the storylines itself, but it
Which
wasn't.
storyline? Which storyline bothered you the most?
I'm trying to think of the
Or
season.
which one impressed you the most?
Um, as terms of a psychological one, let me see. I want to say, uh, hmm, Roanoke.
Hmm.
Um, I like Roanoke the best. Um, only because it was and that was season 6. I like the fact that it was a reality show within a reality show within a TV show.
I
Like,
can honestly, I thought that American Horror Story was becoming a little redundant,
yeah,
and then Roanoke was a nice, really
yeah,
fresh
and
change
they probably thought the same
of
thing.
like the story, just the way they told the story, right? Like
Yeah,
the TV show within a TV show. Um,
it was
and then
very
I
confusing.
love this thing. I love this thing in season 6 where halfway through the season it just literally like without any forewarning it just switches, right? Like
Right,
you watch the first 6 episodes and it's almost like it's over.
right,
And then when it comes back, it got completely flips the script on you. And then you get to watch these characters
right.
all over again as themselves, right? And I
But
was
that was
like,
the
oh, this is
confusion. That was so confusing to me because you were watching, it was like a little bit of the story would be shown, and then they
uh-huh.
would go into these confessionals, as a whole nother person. And I was
Well,
like,
that was the
what the
thing. It was like,
hell?
so
Yeah,
you know
but
how you
I'm
watch,
not knowing that it's set up
drama.
like that.
Yeah. So like, I thought that was slick, and I
I was like,
recognized
what the hell?
what
That
they
was
was doing.
Angela Bassett.
So like they had Cuba Gooding Jr. and then
Right.
they had the guy who was like doing the confessionals, and then in the seventh
Playing
episode, it
him.
just
Well, Cuba
flips
was
on his
playing.
head, and then it's like, or was Cuba playing? I can't remember. Was it Cuba playing? Cuba was playing the real guy. Like he
No, Cuba was the actor.
was the actor, right? That's what I
Yeah.
mean. He was playing the guy who had actually gone through the situation.
Yeah.
And then when they bring them all back for the
On a
reunion,
confession, yeah. They're all there
when
together.
you watch them clash together, and then what
When I'm gonna tell you
I
that, and that was that the first episode.
uh-huh.
So I'm telling you, it wasn't until they all were in the same room
Did
that
you
I was
realize
like,
what was
what
going on?
the hell? Like, because it was confusing. Because I'm in my memory, I'm seeing that the season where it started, that season started with like you would see a little bit of the action, and you
Mhm.
would see Angela like because I kept watching for Angela Bassett because she was playing like a real like down to earth person. It was weird because you
Yeah,
don't see her playing that type of character. So I was watching her do it, but then when they would switch to the confessional, it was a whole nother lady, and I was in my mind I was getting
yeah.
mad like that's not Angela Bassett. Like why would they pick her? Like that's stupid. And then it wasn't
I
until
thought it was
they
so I thought it was dope.
yeah
And I
yeah
recognized what was going on early. And
I was lost.
even though I did, I was completely unprepared for the swap in season in the seventh episode.
But I didn't
So
catch
like,
the crazy thing. I didn't catch it. I only caught it because of Angela Bassett's character. Because all the other people kind of look something like their character. So
mhm.
I was just lost. I was really lost as to who
And
these
then that
people were.
becomes a point of contention in the back end of the season, right? Like
Right,
there was tension in the house over the actual person and the actor who portrayed them, right?
right,
In the
yeah.
show. It was so I really appreciated like just what they
It
did
just
in
threw
that
me
season.
off.
And the funny thing is, like, I didn't, from the horror perspective, I didn't
Right.
think that Roanoke was really that strong. But that
It was just
setup,
like
that
it just cleaned the palette from what you saw for the first
yeah,
5 seasons.
that setup, and the funny thing is that I feel like, and this may not be any fault of like the creators, right? I think that when
Yeah,
you've seen horror enough, I feel like you just start to become desensitized to it, right? Like I
right.
remember watching horror as a younger person and genuinely being scared or nervous, or like dark not wanting to be in dark spaces like soon after watching certain things.
Right, right.
And now it's kind of like I've seen it. And I think what was so great about American Horror Story was that it I'm not gonna sit here and say it was flat out scary, but it was it definitely had some frightening elements early
I
on.
think because
And I
they
think
did
the
a
fact that it was on television, right?
no,
Because
but
they
they
were
did
hitting
a
us with some stuff that you normally is only reserved for the movies.
yeah, but they were mixing in history and folklore and like
Oh yeah.
American
So
folklore
from a
and
storytelling
history.
perspective, they have always had some really, really interesting like and good
Yeah.
storytelling. But I was talking about just the horror element.
No, but
And
that's what I'm saying. But a lot of it was steeped in actual murderers and actual like historical
right.
mythical creatures or not
Uh-huh.
creatures, but individuals like Marie Laveau and even the lady who plays Kathy Bates played in
Uh-huh.
Roanoke. Like a lot of these people were things that you could go back somewhere in history and it be like a
You mean
murdering
in
spree.
Coven.
Yeah, like, but
Yeah.
all of them though had elements of reality. If you go back
Oh
to,
yeah,
and I
no
didn't go
doubt.
into until like
And
the cult followers started
uh-huh.
breaking them down on some of like the YouTube shows. You would see oh, this was something, this was a real killer, or
Uh-huh.
this was really something that really happened. The whole
Yeah.
idea about, Marie Laveau and that character, that was something that allegedly actually happened, or they alleged that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
But these, all of the seasons, specifically this one, well, I think this one, unlike the rest of them, where there was more steeped in historical accuracies or myths or stories, this one kind of was the first one where they did something current.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was because they flipped the reality show idea on its head,
Yeah.
and kind of, but it still had elements of, historical killers,
Mm-hmm.
but more present day historical killers.
Yeah.
And but it was, when I tell
Well,
you
I
this
thought
will
it was
mess my head
interesting
up.
because you had that clown
Yeah,
and there was a thing. Now I don't think he ever actually killed anybody, but remember a couple years ago there was like an internet thing where like there was a clown that would pop up in
that
different
was
places, and I forget what they
that's the one
called
that was
him.
supposed to be in the sewer. That was the I can't remember his name either.
Yeah,
Oh,
there was like a
Penny,
clown
the
that,
Pennywise.
well,
Is that
that's he's from
Pennywise?
that's Pennywise is from It. No, I'm talking about like they were in real life. Like it was there was a guy walking around in a clown suit, and he would like scare people. And I don't think he
Yeah.
ever hurt anybody, but it became like this. And I forget what
Was that a movie?
God, I can't think of his
Because I
name.
think that's
No,
after it started happening.
this happened in real life.
No, I'm
This was a
saying,
real life
I'm
thing.
saying because I think I started hearing about that after that movie where the guy was in the
In the
sewer.
sewer? Oh no,
Yeah, that's when
this
I
was a
started
while
hearing
ago.
about it.
I think this was a little before that. Cause the remakes, they're fairly recent. This is
Mhm.
a little older than the remakes. And it was just a guy that was it was like a it was and I think most people understood it as a prank and whatnot, but it that's what it brought up for me
Mhm.
um when I watched Cult and that clown that was just walking around and kind of like
Now, what
yeah.
season was that? What
Cult
season was
was
that?
season 8, I
So
believe.
are
So
we finished
Roanoke,
with
7.
Roanoke?
Sono. Yeah, like I mean we can I mean I feel like we can bounce around unless we want to talk about them like in
Yeah,
continuous
let's
seasons.
just go from season to season so I don't get confused with
Oh,
the
okay. So
images.
all right, let's talk Cult.
Colt, what season was that?
That was season 7. That was right
Mhm.
after Roanoke.
Okay.
So right after Roanoke, we got Cult. I actually, this is the one. This is my least favorite. Cult to me, I don't know, yo. Like it was like I don't know. It's like torture porn almost, yo. Like I felt like, all right, so
So give them a brief
like,
synopsis for
all
somebody
right,
who may not have
so
seen it.
all right, so Cult. It takes place in this fictional town that is
Mhm.
divided. It starts with the election of President Donald Trump, like
Mhm.
the real life like election, and then basically it's the alt right who create a cult. Like a cult builds up, and like their whole thing is we're gonna take back America. We're gonna, like it was just too close to home, and I felt like while I understood the creativity of it, I just felt like it was they would. I felt like it was purposeful. You know what I mean? Like it to me, it seemed what's the word I'm looking for?
It was
It
too
seemed, it seemed
it was too
very
real.
like they were explore.
It
I
was
don't mind stuff that seems real. I just felt like this came off as like they were exploiting like those feelings that people had around the election of Donald
well,
Trump. I
see,
just
that's
felt
because you
like that. Like,
probably watched it in order of when it came out. I'm watching this now
yeah,
during the pandemic.
and you might be right because obviously, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we are what this came out in 2017.
Mhm.
So, like we're far removed
That
from
was
the
like the
from the
beginning of it.
original election of Donald Trump. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? And then now, like if you just watched it like in the last like couple
But
weeks,
it was
we know
somewhat
that
of the same feeling.
he's no longer going to be the president.
So it was somewhat of the same feeling, but because we're currently at the end of his tyranny, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we haven't been really going outside much or interacting with people. Imagine you watch. I watched this, and it was like the end of October, beginning of November. So
Mhm.
imagine watching it at the height of this election.
Well, I did.
Imagine
That's when I watched
no,
it.
but I'm saying, well, I'm just watching it in general for the first time at
Yeah,
that
like
same
I watched
time,
it when it came
days
out, and to
before
me,
the
it
election.
seemed really exploitative. You know what
It
I mean? Like everybody knew where the country was at with the election of Donald Trump and how people was feeling. And that's not to say that it wasn't good.
I think it
I'm just
really,
saying
but
it
I'm
came
just
off as
saying,
exploitative to me.
well, I'm not gonna agree only because there were people who really were at the, and this wasn't just the alt right side. These were the people like the wife in this that went ape shit crazy, and of course they were really playing with her
Mm-hmm.
throughout all of this, but people really, I know people who got that emotional. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember leading up to the election, finding out who voted for him and getting that emotional. And I
Yeah.
know for TV it was heightened, and they had a whole plot twist where this alt-right group, this cult that was
Mm-hmm.
developing, but the evilness that was surrounding that election of Trump, um, uh, and Hillary in the beginning, it I really say this came as close as TV could get to how people actually felt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I won't go as far as saying it was exploiting it, but I think people, because if I would have watched it when it came out, I think I may have a different perspective. But
Mm-hmm.
watching this in the midst of this election, like it was like we were reliving that moment. And I think that season by itself is going to always be a standout because it was the closest to where we were in reality. Because I was saying at about six, because we were in this reality phase of entertainment. But
Yeah, they played with us on that
that
one.
season, right? But that season really just, I wish I would have watched it when it came out versus
It was
watching
hard
it
to
right
watch.
now.
It was hard. It was
Right.
difficult to watch.
So that's
And
something.
I
Imagine watching it now, like for
uh-huh.
the first time. You saw it, like maybe watched it at the time, but for me, just watching it and
Mhm. You
somehow,
have the benefit of perspective.
right,
Right.
somehow when I was watching it in order, actually I watched it backwards. I
Mhm.
watched it from season 9 and I went down to season 1. So
Oh, really?
somehow
Oh,
the way I was watching it, it just happened to fall. I was watching it the couple days before the election, the
okay.
actual election of this current election. So it just was, I could not stop watching it. Like
Yeah.
it stayed on, and every time I would like either go to sleep for the night, I would start right from the top of it and just watch because I wanted to watch it all the way through. So I was
Mhm.
repeating certain episodes, and it was just weird to me the evil that is associated with that man. They were able to capsulize it in that season, and it's
Mhm.
made for TV, but it's still, I know people who were that on both sides of that. And
Yeah.
that was an accurate depiction of the exaggeration of what was going on. Like I think they took the perspective of media
Mhm.
and how people were reacting.
Yeah.
And it was
I mean,
just
they definitely struck a chord. I'll give them that. Yeah. Like, and I remember the season being good. I just, I feel
it
how I
was a
feel
different
about
time though.
it. And you're right. And looking at it now, for someone who was watching, who might see it for the first time now,
Mhm.
definitely, you have a little bit more of a context and perspective. Um,
'Cause I
but
was like, please don't let him win again, because this is what the world is actually
remembering
gonna be like.
remembering what, like, where we were in 2016,
Right.
and then this comes out, and it really, what I mean, it really took what we all suspected about each other
Yeah.
over Donald Trump, and it really amplified it. You know what I mean? So, from the, because I feel like, it had a really good representation of just about everybody. Like
Yeah.
we saw the character who was like, like trying to act like it didn't matter or he didn't care. We saw the character that just got so like, oh,
Yeah.
everything's gonna end now because Donald Trump is president. And then we get the rise of, Kai in the series, who's played by
Yeah.
Evan Peters, who is this really unhinged individual,
Psychopath.
who psychopath, right? Who becomes a cult leader, right? And it's like,
And elected official at the same time.
right. He runs for elected office, becomes a cult leader. And then what was really disturbing, I think, was watching who he was able to attract.
And it was across
Right,
the board,
because
like the lady who
it
was the
starts with
reporter,
this,
and
it starts with this
wife.
like really kind of like pro-Trump thing, and then it
Yeah.
it evolves into something that
Yeah.
it ultimately has nothing to do with him, right?
Yeah.
Like
It was
the
all people's own
ultimate
inhibitions and
all of
fears
these
and
people, right? He was able to play off, and I think that was like the point. Was that like at the end of the day, you're able, a cult is designed to just play off of your fears, your biases, your whatever emotional states you're going through, right?
right.
And you, in watching it in this season, you get to see how those things are like universal across the board. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody struggles with fear and addiction and biases and all of those things. So it really doesn't matter what the target of your fears or your biases or your emotions are.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with them, then you leave the door open for someone like Kai to come along,
Right.
and and next thing you
But it
know,
wasn't, we keep looking at him, but it was really the people that were associated with him that were really the drawing factor of it. I was
ah,
the lesbian couple, how the wife was secretly driving her wife insane. Like she was in on it. And I was like, how the hell you aid in this? Like this, it was too much. It was too many things that was hitting on current events. So watching anytime this year you watched that, you had a heightened sense of evil, or how politicians or even the media, because the lady who represented the media outlet, her ambition got her into it was like almost, this season should have been called Seven Deadly Sins, because each one of them kind of represented one of the seven deadly sins, and that's how they got themselves into the cult. And he was really like a nobody who was able to influence these people to do the craziest, like they were really, it was like a satanic fight club. Like they was killing
but
each other and killing people
if
and
you watched any of the documentaries, or you've done, or if you've read up on any of like the more famous cults of the past,
right,
like
right.
their leaders are very much like that, right? Like they
Yeah,
they start off as kind of like these oddball loners, but they have that charm. They have some charm, and they know how to, they're good at talking to people one on one
yeah.
and things like that. And yeah, next thing you know what I'm saying, you drinking the Kool-Aid.
And that's the crazy thing, because there's a specific cult that a lot of people are. There's a documentary out on one of them now, and he was like a tech kid, and he ended up starting this whole cult based on people's insecurities, and it was
Mhm.
like people who would normally be well-rounded people getting tricked into these pyramid scheme type of cults. And I was
Right.
like, so me watching that and then watching this season, when I say this, it was weird. It was
Mhm.
weird watching that because it was too close to right now. That's what made
Yeah.
it so weird to me. It was too, and even the personalities, the actors that were being represented, uh,
Yeah.
it was too close to people that you know a restaurant owner who may be a little on the fence. You know the lesbian couple or this. It was too.
Hmm.
So when we said
Yeah.
we were going to do this season as one
Hmm.
episode, I had already watched it, and I was like, "This is going to be crazy."
Like, I
So
mean, you can tell from that opening that this was going to be a crazy season.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, like I would definitely recommend it. I thought it was exploitative, but I watched it, in the mist and the very in like
explain
the height.
explain when you say exploitive.
Well, I
Explain
just
that.
felt like it. I felt like it purposefully and intentfully, like, just looked to capitalize on a lot of the fears and the rhetoric at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and you know what, yo, like, honestly, hearing myself say that, I wonder if that's even, um if there's anything wrong with that in the context of this particular show. But then also
Yeah,
hearing you talk about it and understanding that like, I think I would have felt that way about anything
and look at who
during
produced
during
it. Look at
that
who
during
produced
that
it.
particular time period, that
Right.
was like, that if I felt like they were like making entertainment out of
But this was a
what we
form
were
of
going through
activism,
because
though.
of Trump.
It was a form of activism. Because
I can see that.
look at I mean Ryan Murphy is kind of the epitome of an anti-Trumper. So
Hmm.
it would be, looking at all the other work he's done.
Yeah.
This was like his strongest form of activism. This was a big middle finger to Trump, because for him to do this during that time was him saying, "Hey, we don't need Trump as president," in a way that was not bigging up Hillary. It wasn't necessarily helping her in many cases, but it definitely helped her trial against him, or her point of view against him, because it was really just outing, and it wasn't even about Trump. It was about the evilness, because I think at the end of the day, all of them forgot why they were doing it.
Yeah.
It became about the mission of this
It
one
did.
person.
It did. It did. It definitely, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it definitely started with Trump,
Hmm.
but very, very over the course of the season really delved into um a cult,
Yeah,
like the inner workings of a cult. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I'm probably gonna watch it a second time.
I've been trying, but I'm
Get
trying to
into it.
like, and I may watch it over this break, because a lot of the shows that I'm doing are coming to a hiatus point. But I want to watch it through. I don't want to jump
Mhm.
around. I want to watch it through, because it really, I needed to watch it that way,
Oh yeah,
and it was crazy.
you should definitely watch it like the whole way through,
But I
like from
watched it.
beginning to
What was
end.
weird, I don't know why I did it. And it's probably because I had watched all the other seasons until we decided to do it. And I hadn't watched nine. So I started
Uh-huh.
with nine and was like, well, what if I just went backwards? And I watched
Uh-huh.
it that way, which made it look very weird.
Which is real weird because
Yeah.
so I almost did the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, like, I was familiar with the series. So when
Right.
I went to Netflix, I immediately recognized that they were like, the way that it's set up, it was in reverse order. I'm not
Yeah.
sure why that is.
Well, the latest thing is always at the top. That's how it always, like, on a lot of those streaming networks, it's always the latest season
Nah,
is always at the top.
you know what? Maybe because it's technically still in, like, it's still going on.
Yeah.
Because usually on Netflix, if you go to something with multiple seasons, it starts with season one
That's if
and
it's
then it works
finished
your
though.
way
That's
down.
if it's like not.
And you might be right. It could just be
Yeah.
because it could just be for the shows that are finished.
Because I
Um,
think I watching the
or it
Paulson
could be
something,
that
and it
they
was in
changed it. It
order.
could be that they changed the format because it used to be like season one, season two, season three,
Mhm,
and now it's
mhm.
not like that. That's just the name of the season.
Oh
And
yeah.
that could have something to do with it too. But
Mm-hmm.
look, let's jump down to the first season. Let's talk about Murder House,
Okay.
the start of it all. So Murder House is this one is set in Los Angeles. It's about a family who moves into a house, and as their story progresses, you find out that the house is pretty much haunted. I mean, the first season is really just a typical ghost story, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're in the house, but American Horror Story um always has multiple thread. At least usually there are multiple subplots going on, right? So you have this main concept,
Mm-hmm.
and through the characters involved, you get these subplots and backstories and historical context, which is what I love specifically about season 1 and season 2 was the
Mm-hmm.
historical context. So like by the end of Murder House, you have gone through pretty much the entire history of this house from the start of it becoming haunted all
Mm-hmm.
the way up to this most recent family to live there. Um in Murder House, pretty much like all like as far as debuts go for a TV series, I think this is one of the best ones that I can think of in recent memory. That
Mm-hmm.
first episode, like you immediately realize that there is some wild shit going on in this house, all the way down to the end. I remember the end of that episode where you realize that the wife is sleeping with somebody and it ain't her husband, right? And she
Mm-hmm.
don't know that. And that's pretty much how it starts, and then it just kind of it goes from 0 to 100 real quick, and then it just stays there. Um, so yeah, what'd you think of Murder House? I thought Murder House, first of all, like what's that guy's name? Dylan McDermott.
Yeah.
Who he's one of those actors, like I don't even think I knew what his name was at the time, but I was familiar with him, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in other stuff that I'd seen. So I knew who he was. And
Right.
then to watch him play that particular role, I was like, oh, okay, they on to something here. Like they really on to something. And and we also get introduced to who becomes Jessica Lange.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
who
the name I was trying to think about. Jessica
who
Lange.
becomes a mainstay for the next few seasons. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Murder House, I just thought that it was to bring horror to TV and to do it so well. I remember thinking that American Horror Story couldn't possibly be that good because of all the restrictions that you get with, like, network TV, even on cable, you know what I mean? And when I saw what they did with American Horror Story in that first season, I was like, oh, this some other shit.
And see that's
Um,
so when I watch it again, I'm gonna start from one and go to the end because
okay.
watching it from 9 and going backwards, I think there was you saw the evolution kind of go backwards in terms of where they went with stories and how things were connected. And
Yeah.
I started to watch one and then go through, and I can see the difference in watching it. But one to me was, I think, probably my least favorite. It was, it was typical horror setup to me,
Yeah,
unlike
it
the
was.
rest of them.
And I thought it worked because, and like I thought it worked because it was done so well for television. And I think
Yeah,
that's what kept me hooked on it. Not
yeah,
so much like when you compare the quality and the storylines of the other seasons to Murder House is actually, I think, probably on the back end,
yeah,
as far as like originality and just kind of like like
yeah,
really like I said, it's really just your basic haunted house
yeah.
story. Um, but they pushed the envelope in a lot of that storytelling to kind of set the stage or the expectation of like what you're going to get from American Horror Story. And to watch it for the first time. Like I remember seeing it when it first came out, and it was just so totally to the left of everything that was on TV at the time. And then of course, because they
Yeah.
get better as it gets better as it goes on. And you see that, so it kind of doesn't really take away, but it makes you realize that they had a lot more planned out as the seasons went on.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
but Murder
Asylum
House
kind
was
of set the
House
stage for
was
me.
solid. Murder House was solid. Um, and then some of the like all of the seasons really take you through a lot of emotions and stuff, right? I thought, I thought they introduced some ideas and elements in this particular ghost story that I had never seen before, and just they were really intriguing. Like I thought the older maid lady who
Mm-hmm.
looks like the old maid lady to women, but
Yeah.
all the guys saw her as like her younger self.
Yeah.
I
So
thought that
those things kind of set
her.
it. Those were the parts that kind of was like, okay, now once I started, because I had seen everything else, and
Mm,
then watching this last, I was saying, okay, now I see where they're going because they're playing with illusion
mm-hmm.
and the whole aspect of they could go into that room and ask for anything that they wanted. They just couldn't take it outside.
Yeah.
All of those things was like, okay, this is not the typical horror story. This is going to be a psychological series of seasons. So
Yep.
I caught that after watch. So because I saw all the other ones, I saw how that being number one was kind of setting up what was to come in a very what we were used to type of way. Like this was, like you said, it was very typical haunted house type of thing, and the house was kind of,
The story itself was not typical at all, but
yeah,
the basic
the way
premise
it looked.
was a typical ghost story. It was a haunted
Yeah,
house story.
yeah,
Yeah. Um. Oh man, and then when she almost got out, that same
yeah,
character. Remember, she was almost about to get out, and then they built the gazebo over her body. I was like, damn, sis.
yeah,
But
yeah,
Murder House pretty much starts it off, sets the tone, and then we move into the second series, which is Asylum.
yeah,
Um, and this is the highest point of American Horror Story in my mind.
right,
That season was so I can't think of any other word. It was fucked up. And for me, having spent some time working in a mental institution, and to watch some of these characters and how easy it was, and just the recognition of like how ignored and not listened to that population is, uh,
right,
and then to watch some of these horrors happen to them, and there's no one to believe them, and then like the people who are doing it to them
yeah.
know and understand that there's nothing that they can do and that no one's going to believe them.
And we in the
Um,
beginning we talked a little bit about what was that, Ratchet, that TV series, kind of playing off of this season,
right.
and it really like I think watching them together was necessary, even though you didn't have Ratchet out when this came out. It
Yeah.
really did. I don't like. I never really like horror movies that use asylums or crazy houses or whatever. I don't. I never normally like them because it's a reality that is real. Like a lot of people abuse people in those types of facilities, and a lot of murders and deaths
Mhm.
actually did happen as a result of the old form of what an asylum was. Like people just left people there to die. It wasn't even like rehabilitation. It was
Mhm.
just where people went to die and spend the
Yeah.
rest of their life. And it was just a lot. And I noticed that being a theme in a lot of different TV shows now.
At the
That
time,
aspect of the asylum.
now,
Yeah.
yeah. So Asylum, I think it separates itself because it predates a lot of these more recent shows.
Yeah,
But also, I think in the context of American Horror Story, like when you really think about it, like they have several seasons that I think address marginalized communities.
yeah, mental
Right?
health.
And we'll get into that as
Hmm.
we move on. But Asylum, like, yeah, like I think, and they addressed it from just about every angle, yo. From like we saw the main character played by Sarah Paulson, who literally wasn't there because of anything other than the fact that she was on the verge of exposing the the
Yeah,
the asylum for what it was, right? And
and then
thrown
she becomes a patient.
fine. Then we see right. So she becomes a patient because she's on the cusp of
Yeah,
exposing them for what they are.
yeah,
Or she runs afoul of the nurse. We see the person in charge
yeah.
who then turns and becomes a patient because of her questioning some of the things that are going on, even though she's very much a part of it.
And in charge of it.
We saw the experiment. We saw the doctor who was experimenting on them,
Yeah.
right, and doing it under the guise of like, hey, no one's gonna believe, I can do what I want, like just with reckless abandon. Then we see the serial killer who
Hmm.
who is like hiding right there amongst
In plain sight. Yep.
in plain sight. Um, and then of course, in typical, what you soon to find out is typical American Horror Story. Like every time you think you know where this is about to go, it goes
Hmm.
somewhere else.
But just how overall of it, I love how interconnected
Hmm.
all the storylines are. Like you don't get it as it's coming out, but once you jump ahead a season, you start understanding something that has already happened in
Yeah,
a season back, something that may have been like a lingering question for you. It then gets summed up when you see something else.
yeah,
So this same asylum becomes the location for another story at some point.
right.
And it just makes so much sense because it then you get understanding based off of watching this season, but then you get answers to questions that you had when you watch another part of the season. But I like this one, and I in my opinion they should have started with this as season one, but that's just my because that would have let us know the amount of crazy that was about to happen in the
Mhm.
next 9 seasons of this show.
Yeah.
But it was cool. It was a really good watch. But this one was more typical of what even though the season one was very typical of horror stories, this was the more psychological dramas that we see.
Mhm.
And I love just you didn't know what was about to happen. And the
No,
fact
it
that
was a total mind fuck.
yeah, you didn't know
It
what
was
was
a
coming.
total, yeah. You didn't know what was coming. I mean, they threw aliens in there for
Yeah,
good measure. It was like on top of everything that was going on.
yeah.
They right, like, oh, let's throw an alien abduction in there, like a real life, like for real alien abduction.
And
Um,
the time period that these seasons are happening are very significant. And
mhm,
it forced me to kind of like, as I was watching the seasons, to then go and look at that moment because I love history. So then going back and looking back at
mhm.
that period, and they were
'Cause
really spot on with
yeah,
a lot,
and it
everything
coincides,
really.
and I think the reason why that particular time period was chosen because it actually coincided with where you start to see a lot of these
Mhm.
hospitals get taken over by the state,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because of what they find out. But then you
yeah,
also watch how the state really doesn't do much better, and
yeah.
really kind of expand because they just, I feel like the state comes in and all of a sudden they just start throwing any and everybody into
It was
the
more. It was
into
more
these hospitals.
regulations, really. Just more
Yeah.
regulations that they add to it. But as you said, that's the significance of the time period. Because this story being in that, it tells you a lot about where they were, and that whole idea of socialized medicine, and
Hmm.
how when the government comes in, as you said, things don't necessarily change. They can actually
Right.
get worse because
They get worse.
the quality of what was
Right. The
happening
quality goes down.
got worse.
Hmm.
Now
and
people
really
not
because
only getting experiments, but
yeah,
they're not getting the medicine that they need. And
yeah, and now you dealing with overcrowding. You like piling people on top of each other.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but Coven is my favorite. I mean, not Coven. I'm sorry. Asylum
Solid.
is I just the acting all around in this one is superb. Um,
Hmm.
as a matter of
Yeah.
fact, I think Asylum is the one that won like a bunch of awards that
Oh,
season
okay.
because
I
like
can see that. I can
specifically
see that.
for yeah, I think what's her name? What's the one? Sarah Paulson, I
Fair
think, was
person.
nominated or won something. What's the other one whose name? Jessica Lange, Zachary Quinto. Yeah, like
Those
it
two,
was
Jessica Lange and Sarah
they like that
Paulson.
was the I think that was the season that got a bunch of like nominations. I remember one of the seasons where like how like every now and then a show gets racks up just a bunch of nominations like in all these different categories, and I
Right.
think Asylum was that was their year.
Yeah. And those two, I like the fact that Sarah Paulson and Jessica Lange, we see them all throughout this series. I think those are the two top players throughout all of this. You see them in almost
Yeah.
everything.
Um, um, yeah, you know what? I think you probably right. I'm
I think
trying to
Sarah Paulson was in every episode, every season.
every
If I'm
season
not
she
mistaken,
probably was.
Jessica Lange wasn't in every season,
Oh,
but she
Jessica
was
Lange
in
was in
most
because I
of them.
don't think she came back after. Was she in? I can't remember if she was in Freak Show or not.
Yeah, she was in
But
Freak Show.
she
She was
was in
in
Freak
Freak
Show. So
Show.
I think
Mhm.
Freak Show was her last. I think Freak Show was her last season.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know she was in the first three, and then Freak Show, and then after that is Hotel, and I don't think she was in Hotel.
Mm.
So next up is Coven. Talk about it. It seemed to be like a lot of people. A lot of people was banging. A lot of people bang with Coven.
Because it was the whole like Salem witch trial. It was it it mimicked like a lot of the witch shows that had been going through like the 90s, the early 2000s, and then we started getting more information and more series that were like deep about witches and that whole bruja culture that was starting to rise. So I think that's why that was season became very popular as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm. I wasn't all that crazy about Coven when I first watched it.
Wow.
However, I don't know. It was probably honestly back then probably because it was like the female centered
Mm-hmm.
uh Coven. And I
Right.
think that's what, and it wasn't that it was a turnoff. I just wasn't into it like I was into the first seasons.
Right.
Um,
But again,
then
it
I
was all of them
rewatched
was
it.
very different. It wasn't like one
Yeah,
led you
you're
to
right.
the next one. It was a total
It's a
pivot
totally
from
different
what you
story. And I
start.
just the first. So I think like the first two episodes, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
just first of all, like I wasn't really like I've never really been into like at least not I'm not infatuated by the witch mythology, right? Like they cool, but I prefer vampires and zombies. Like, you know what I mean? Like witches just have never been all that interesting to me in the way that they're interested to a lot of other people.
Well, that's the
So
disconnect
I was
that they have. History has disconnected them from history, so they have been a strong part of history. Our culture, religion in of itself, they've been a
mhm,
strong connection, and they've been so villainized and negative parts of history has pointed towards them being so evil, even the church making them an evil component, and they all were the same thing at one point. But I think that's why people don't really gravitate. And then we had a
no,
resurgence
I
of
just don't like honestly, like I can watch stuff about all types of supernatural stuff at the time.
right.
like witches just wasn't it for me.
But it
And then
wasn't.
like
It was never this
watching the
honest
first,
though.
huh?
It was never this honest. It was always fanciful and
Oh well, I wouldn't know. I mean, I wouldn't
potions
know. At
and
the time. I wouldn't have even known the difference.
yeah.
So I think for me, and like I realized why it turned me off when I first watched it was just it. In the time, I wasn't fitting to sit there. Like it starts and it's like this. The real central story over the first 2 episodes is about these, four teenage witches, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's very typical. Like they go to a party. You know what I mean? Shit happens. They use their
Right.
magic. Other shit happens. They killed my boy Evan Peters in like the first episode. I was mad about that. I was like, yo,
Mm-hmm.
like I ain't even feeling this. So then I watch it, again in preparation
Mm-hmm.
for this, and realize that this might be like the season where they said they like the underlying messages in this season.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, wait a
Yeah.
minute. So that like, so this time around, because I'm watching it for the show, I watched past the second episode, and then I get to that conversation between Angela Bassett and Jessica Lange's character
Yeah.
about where the witchcraft came from.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, immediately I was like, oh, I like set up in my chair. I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Oh,
That's
they
and
talking some shit now.
but it
And
is
now I
TV
look at
show.
Coven and I'm like, oh, like Coven is actually one of the strongest seasons in the show.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
I see why people like it, because it's and we talked about this like last week in our comic book episode. Like we talked about how a lot of the successful comic book movies now have been taking certain film genres and just adding superheroes. I was like, okay, so this is a show about race relations, and they
Yeah.
just added witches. I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
That's why I was saying
this is
this
about
was
uh,
this
this is a
what's her
struggle
name?
between black and white, and they just added witches into it. I was like,
Yeah.
and immediately I was like, oh yeah, I'm in it.
Look at the whole Kathy Bates character, and understanding that, and that's why I was saying it's so steeped in history, especially the witch and Bruja culture, and it really deals with racism. Um, it doesn't really touch on sexism because it's very woman driven, but it really shows us this where we are. It's in New Orleans. It's placed in New Orleans, and we know a lot of the history of that city and
Yeah.
how people that look like us have been almost erased and relegated to just being slaves. So having that Angela Bassett character rise up in that and really be a strong component, whereas though they couldn't just get rid of her. It wasn't, she actually was doing all the damage and locking that lady away for eternity, really, making righting wrongs, if you will, and that's who that Marie Lareau character was in real life. So that's why I love um the strong history component to it, because you wouldn't have been looking at that probably the first time you saw it.
No, I wasn't.
Perspective is what timing is everything. That's why I said the timing of these things were so precursor to where we are. And because race was probably really big right now, watching it now, you will definitely hear that a lot more than you probably heard it when it came out in the third season.
So just on like Asylum and going back to Coven, like on Rotten Tomatoes, Asylum is the highest rated one, 84% fresh, and right behind it is Coven at 83%. Yeah, and like I concur. Like once I actually sat and allowed myself to get engrossed in the story,
right?
Coven immediately shot up the list.
Because and a lot of people that I saw that didn't like it initially, they thought it was just going to be like another teen witch show.
That's what I got. So even with the introduction, because like Kathy Bates' character gets, but I just assumed that it was a plot device. You know what I mean? I didn't. It didn't like that aspect of her character. It just didn't seem to. I didn't feel like that was going to be something that was like
because they didn't set you up
expounded.
for it. It
It
just
set it up
happened.
like it was gonna be expounded on.
Yep.
Um, and it right in those first two episodes, it did kind of look like it was going to be like this teenage angst
Yep.
story with witches. And it did. It kind of like made me be like, I started paying attention a little less and a little less.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I watched it, I was like, oh, this got a lot going on, and it's saying a lot. Also, you know
And
what I mean?
it was very subtle, but
Mm,
then it became towards the second half of that season, it became heavy about it.
mhm,
Once they brung Kathy Bates back and that story started to unfold, it was
yeah,
you couldn't hide the racial aspect of it.
mhm,
And then the fact that you then realize this is in New Orleans and you know that history of that place in terms of slavery and the witchcraft and the French and African kind of collide. Like you
mhm,
start seeing it, and I like the fact that it went back in time and told the story, and then brought us back and gave us a very, authentic perspective of that period. The whole reason
mhm,
why Marie Laveau is causing so much havoc is because the way that Kathy Bates killed her baby father. So
mhm,
that gives a whole reason for Marie Laveau character to be in this and be so prominent.
right,
But then that whole idea against the witches versus the Charmin women, or the
mhm.
Charmin and not
The
Charmin women,
shaman,
that's the man,
right?
but the Charmin and the Grigri women.
Mhm.
So it gives you a lot. I loved it for just that aspect alone, and you got to
Yeah,
get past all the teen angst and
yeah.
typical
Well, I mean,
teen
like, you
stuff.
really just got to get past like into episode 3 and beyond.
Right, 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 right.
Because the show becomes a little less about them per
Yeah,
se, even though like they remain integral parts, but it like the story just opens up a little bit more, and you start to see it for what it really is, and that it's not like the craft, you know what I mean, for
but it
TV.
shows us that we, even in that area, in that genre, we have so much more to say. As you were speaking about Blade before being the first kind of
Yeah.
action superhero, we we could really write. And I hate the fact that white people keep on giving us the permission to be able to do this and showing us that we have more history and storytelling and aspects. We didn't have to share that season with the witches. You know,
Hmm.
Marie Laveau character alone, once they really sit down and make a movie about her life, and the witch that she replaced, like it's enough for a whole series on its own. We don't
Hmm.
have to be a part of their story. And I'm not, I'm thankful for Rod Murphy because he's shedding light on that. But it
Yeah.
was, I loved it. I loved it for that reason. I didn't really like the teen part of it,
Hmm.
and then trying to sneak in the racial aspect of it, but that was it. I love, and the three of them together, well, actually, the four of them together was just beyond, you know, we got to, and that was the first time we got to see Gab Sidibe kind of step outside of that Precious character as well and do something different. But that was a solid season,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
much
I
so.
agree. So next up is Freak Show. Um, this was by far, in my opinion, one of the weirdest episodes.
Yeah.
Obviously with the subject itself,
Mm-hmm.
um, Freak Show being, and it literally is what it sounds like.
Right.
It's set in a circus of what a freak
Mm-hmm.
show circus.
Right.
So for anybody who
But
don't
just
know,
a
that's
circus at
like
all. That was kind of the origin of circuses.
yeah, like this is like the shortest man alive, or the
The
human
bearded
this, the
woman. And,
bearded woman, all that
mm-hmm.
stuff. And again, another marginalized community.
Mm-hmm.
And but I thought it was a really good season.
Yeah.
But I can understand. I would encourage people to go back and give it another watch,
Mm,
because I think that people who may have been turned off by Freak Show may have been turned off by it for the same reason that I was initially turned off by Coven, right?
right.
And giving the story a little time to open up might make all the difference.
Well,
Uh,
you have to have a little again, like Ryan Murphy in this series, I think, forced people to who were really who claim they were TV watchers to really go and do their homework, go do research beyond just watching the season. You had to kind of know some context because people don't realize that these people were real people in real life, not
mm,
necessarily they kind of depicted people, but the bearded women, and these were actual people who had these who were oddities. They were called oddities, going all the way back to Hottentot, who was kind of like one of the first oddities to be, toured around the world, and eventually became like, you know, um, she died based on that, and a lot of these people really being a part of history and really and understanding just the dynamic of what the circus was and why we no longer have the typical or traditional circus anymore because it was exploiting animals and people, you know um and the circus today is definitely not the circus that this is depicting, but that circus was real. These people
mm,
were real little people and real women who had hair, growth issues and, may have had a third limb. Like I think Angela Bassett's character in this one had like a third breast or something. Like
mm,
it's funny, but these people were born with deformities and they were, they had no other place to work or make a living without people staring at them or not wanting to hire them, so they became a part of this traveling circus to make a living for themselves, and then it was a community within itself because they began to marry each other and procreate with each other, and
mm-hmm.
so I think this was one of the funniest seasons to me.
It was.
It
I
was
thought it was
definitely one of the
it was
funniest.
a lot of comedy. I mean, the season is basically set around, like, I think, like, the freak show is on its way out, like,
Yeah,
as a form of entertainment for the
yeah,
masses.
yeah.
And they're struggling, and she's trying, like, the Jessica Lange is the leader, and she's trying to figure out how to save the freak show, right?
Right.
Um, and then all of the things ensue from there.
Yeah. And these people wanting to actually be entertainers but could not
Angela Bassett,
entertain. Right.
Angela
They didn't.
Bassett had 3 breasts in this one, by the way.
Right.
So if you
Right.
if you need another reason to go check it out.
Wow. But it was just the idea of them actually being in, these people really wanted to be entertainers and they couldn't, in real life, couldn't find venues that would really house them without them being
Right.
spectacles.
Hmm.
And I've learned a lot of that in terms of the idea of the museum kind of eventually the circus came out of the museum element because a lot of these people were a part of museums at first, like
Hmm.
not Ringling Brothers, Barnum, P.T. Barnum.
Barnum and Bailey. Hmm.
Yeah. He eventually connected with them, but he was parading around these oddities, like,
Yeah.
the smallest human head, and these
Hmm.
were the skulls of these people who were actually in the circus or body parts of remnants of these people, or they were stuffed, taxidermy and stuff like that, where all this stuff came from. So I love museum life and history and all the things, and American Horror Story definitely was a play on American history or world history in terms of like the marginalized individuals. I think that was
Yeah.
kind of the theme throughout all of the seasons. But I
Hmm.
love this season. I love the circus, so I'm a circus person, but it was
Yeah,
pretty
I
cool.
I enjoyed Freak Show, and I remember when Freak Show came out, and a lot of people that I know who also frequenting American Horror Story, they kind
Mhm.
of went down, like they felt about Freak Show the way that I felt about Coven initially.
Oh,
Um
okay.
and but I enjoyed Freak Show a lot. Um
I wonder if the order of the seasons would change, would people feel different? Like this has a cult following, and I think each season has its own cult following.
each
But
season does seem, well, not, I won't say every season has this cult following. Coven has a cult following. I think Asylum has a cult following. Um, and I think there might be a few others that people really go in for. Um,
go on YouTube. They
uh,
each one of them have this own, like almost own
yeah,
community, and it's weird because it's only a season. But
mhm,
people delve into, like I was just saying, all the historical backstory of each one of these seasons has a tie into real life. And it's like a community of people that only like to talk about this one and only like cosplay. A lot of cosplay people were connected to this season
yeah,
in terms of like the people who like to dress up
mhm.
and relive TV shows and movies and stuff like that. But
What'd
it
you
was
what'd you
interesting.
think of Hotel?
Hotel,
Hmm.
at first it started slow, but as most of these seasons do, it starts off in such a, just to get you into the door, and then the blood and gore starts to happen. And you like, whoa, I thought this was just gonna be a little boring little TV show, but then Hotel was really it was interesting. It is it's very interesting. I think it was I kind of followed the story of, well the Lady Gaga character in this is kind of like the ultimate part of the story, but
Hmm.
it was just weird. It was just the way the stories unfold is just
Yeah.
so weird because not everything is explained naturally.
Hmm.
So some stuff you just don't understand it till the end of the season,
Right. Yeah.
or until you get to a part of the season, or another part of another season's explanation, and you like, but the story still is a full story without all the explanations, and I like that because you don't have to explain everything. Because I miss TV that was just TV. Not
Yeah.
everything has to have a answer or reason, but it does. But you got to find like the hidden Easter eggs in the story to kind of put everything together. I liked it. It was real dark, and it was one of the slow seasons. The season went real slow, and it was like the story was coming out, but you had to connect something 3 episodes into something that was in episode one. So this season made you kind of sit and wait a lot more for
Yeah.
the story to unfold.
Yeah. I don't mind, like we've talked about this in the past. Like, I don't mind a slow burn if it's interesting.
Yeah,
Hotel unraveled slowly, but it definitely was interesting enough to keep my attention.
right.
But I yeah, like I thought Lady Gaga was excellent.
Yeah,
And she was enough really to keep me at least engaged enough to keep coming back just to see where the story was going to go. Uh,
yeah,
yeah, the issue, it was like it was very drummed down on the horror. So by the time Hotel came out, like, we had Coven, and then we had Freak Show and Hotel. So like
right.
the thing that kind of irritated me about Freak Show and Hotel is that I didn't feel like either one of them were particularly scary. And I don't even know if they were trying to be, but
Right.
they were also rather light on the psychological aspect as well, right?
Yeah.
So I that was where, so like, while I like forgave it in Freak Show,
Right.
it started kind of irking me in Hotel. But again, the performance from Lady Gaga. Now, one thing that I can say is, like, that's the only bright spot of Hotel that I remember. particularly bright spot, because this was the one season that was kind of weird because it almost didn't have it didn't really it only had like two returning characters. I think Sarah Paulson and Evan Peters was in it, and then everybody else. Oh, Angela Bassett was in this one too. She did have a like it was like a smaller part, but she was in Hotel. But
And not Jessica Lange, but Sarah Paulson and
Sarah Paulson
Cassie Bates was in it.
was.
Cassie Bates was the
Kathy
front desk
Bates?
person.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
She was the
right.
front desk person, and her son was the boyfriend
That's right. That's right.
of Lady Gaga. That's how she got into the story because her
Yeah.
son
So
was
like,
disappeared.
and that was the thing. Like the returning characters all seem to play like they all seem to take a little bit of a back seat. Like
I'm trying to remember where was Angela Bassett in this. What
she was
I don't remember her being in it.
she was like the jilted ex-girlfriend. Like there was a character in
I have to
Hotel
watch it again.
um uh what was it? The guy Will uh, uh it was she was somebody's like lover. And,
Mhm.
and like she wasn't an integral, and that was the thing. Like I can't remember exactly what her role was
She
because
wasn't like this. Wasn't the one where her and Lady Gaga were in a relationship, was it?
was it Lady Gaga that she was in a relationship with? Yeah, that I think that
Yeah.
was it.
Okay.
I think that was it. She
I
was
just
one of the,
I
she was
don't
like one
remember
of the
her being in it though. That's the crazy part. It may have been
no, she was,
early
but that was
on.
the thing. Like that was the thing. Like all of them had like these. They all seem to take a back seat. Like the normal
Yeah.
actors that we normally used to seeing in like the leading roles in American Horror Story, they all kind of took a back seat
I
in
like that
Hotel.
though. I think that
Well, I like it too. The problem was that the people who were in the main lead roles, with the exception of Lady Gaga, were
mhm.
like, I don't know, like the acting. I don't know if it was the acting or the way that their characters were written. They were a lot less engaging,
Well, we were
right?
used up into so this is season 5, right? So up until this point, I think we were used to seeing the faces of the Angela Bassett, the Kathy Bates. We were used to seeing their face up front, and then for them to
That may
kind
be
of fade
possible.
in the
I didn't
background.
particularly like Matt Bomer. Who else was in it? Wes Bentley. Like them to me, like I don't know. They just didn't seem to carry it as well as the other ones. Now it could be what you're saying, that I was just so used to seeing like the Sarah Paulson, the Jessica Langes, and the Evan
Mhm.
Peters in the forefront that it threw me off.
And they all played supportive characters in this season. Because I had to remember, I still do
Yeah,
not remember the scenes that Angela Bassett were in.
Angela
Like
Bassett was in a
Kathy
support
Bates was
role.
a
Kathy
very
Bates was in a support. Even
yeah,
Evan Peters. Evan
yeah,
Peters played the guy who built the hotel,
yeah.
right? It was really he shows up here and there, but there's really one episode where you kind of find out like what his backstory is and who he was. Like he had all these chambers in the hotel where he was torturing people and all that stuff. But
Right.
his character is a supporting character. It's not somebody that is focused on throughout the course
But
of the
this one was
series.
also, I felt like they had gotten, I think the series had gotten so much acclaim at this point that it was like, I feel like this wasn't so much what do we do. It looked like they had a strong concept, but it was like, where do they just put the people in the wrong places? Because I remember this was a season where Naomi Campbell was in it, and it was a whole like fashion aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Guy who comes in and buys the hotel, but he
Yeah.
doesn't kick anybody out. I'm like, what does that happen? Like, so you just gonna have these people living here? Like,
Definitely. I feel like if Freak Show was like a transition for the show from like horror to like
Right.
weirdness.
Because we see what happens in 6.
And then
So it picks back up.
Hotel continues down the weirdness, right? And then I think the next one is Roanoke, which I also think, you know what I'm saying, kept, I
Yeah.
mean, that really off those 4 seasons, like Freak
Right.
Show, Hotel, Roanoke, Cult, where the show transitions from, you know, like it goes from like this horror to like this very kind of like weird, it starts to play in these weird spaces.
But I think it's supposed to be jarring. It's supposed
It
to
is.
be jarring
No, it's not a
because you
bad.
never know what, because they had some low energy, like definitely Hotel was low energy, and then you go back to Roanoke where it's like
Yeah,
fast
Roanoke
paced, and then it's
picked up the pace in Roanoke.
right. But I think every other season was like that because one was low, and then you come back in with Asylum, and then it kind of keeps it moving in the third season and the fourth season, and then the fifth season, and then now we got to spike this back up. So
Do
I
you
think
think that's
the
intentional?
order of it,
Did it just kind of like, you know, like faltering and
right?
then kind of understanding that you faltered and it's like, okay, now the pressure is on to pick it back up.
What it ultimately feels like watching all 9 of these is that they came up with all of these concepts or most of them in the beginning, and then they played this game of where to put them, and
Mhm.
they didn't really even the high and low out so even because we just had 3 seasons that kind of flatline that wasn't necessarily boring, but they just flatline, and then you go right into 6 that was like a show within a show within a show, and it was it was just
Yeah.
that's I'm telling you that still messes my head up. It still messes my head up because I was watching it and I was doing something else while I was watching it, and I'm seeing the flashback, but I'm
Mhm.
like, what kind of? I understood that it was like a reality show and they were setting it up, but I did not catch that Angela Bassett was the character, and the other lady was the real life person.
Uh-huh.
And so it was just weird. It was weird, and it just took us to a whole nother level. But
I mean, I thought that Colt definitely brought the series back for me.
mhm,
Um, because I think I was on the verge of being like, you know what, I think I am all horror storied out. And then Roanoke came out and I was like, okay. I was like,
right.
this is different. And I didn't know where it was gonna go. But once Roanoke did the swap, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm all in on this one. This is slick.
So
They
we're left with
caught me on.
Apocalypse
So we
and
talked about Roanoke and Colt. So that takes us to the last 2 seasons. The first of which was Apocalypse. Uh,
okay.
what did you think of Apocalypse? I enjoyed it. I thought I was really skeptical about how they were going to make that work. Uh,
Now I'm gonna tell you what this season felt
and
like.
I hate that you watched it in reverse
Right,
because of Apocalypse. I
right.
because of Apocalypse. And did you actually watch them in reverse? So you had not seen Coven before you saw Apocalypse.
No, I had watched maybe like an episode, but again, I told you like it wasn't until this that I started really watching stuff because I don't like waiting until the next episode is coming out. So if
Uh,
I'm over somebody's house and they're watching it, that's how I saw it. But I wasn't like looking for it. But this season felt like Ratchet Bates Motel. That's what it felt like to me.
which one? Which we talking about?
With
Apocalypse,
Apocalypse. That's what it felt. It felt
Ratchet
like
Bates Motel.
it felt well. I say that because Ratchet and Bates Motel were not a part of this series. They wasn't like spin-offs or anything, but they lent itself because of what happened during this series of seasons. So it just felt like it was a part of it that was that was a part of it, but it didn't really fit in. And mainly because everything was either past or present. This went into the future. So that's the part that kind of jarred you once again, because he played a lot in history. He you can see in nine where is a lot of today, and you see today throughout some of it. But
Mm-hmm.
again, it was mostly history or period pieces. This was period in the future. And
Yeah.
I think that's what threw it off because it was so weird. And I'm telling you, because I watched 1984, what the confusing part is when you see a character in that season and then you see him in this season. So you have to kind of like shake yourself up a little bit because you got to realize this is a whole nother character now. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what was happening. One of the prominent characters in season 9 was one of the prominent characters in to start off with in season 8. So because I watched it backwards, I was like, okay, this is a whole nother character. But it
Mm-hmm.
was just it felt like something was missing. Just the
Mm-hmm.
one I know I said I liked one least, but this one was like it didn't even feel like a part of this series to me.
Uh-huh.
It just that maybe because it was more futuristic and everything
Yeah.
else was steeped in history or some part of history or present. This just felt like it was just I see how it fits the story or go alongside the story, but it
Mm-hmm.
looks like a spin-off. It doesn't feel like a part of this.
So that's where I feel like watching it out of the context of Coven
Mm-hmm.
becomes confusing because this is really like Apocalypse is really a sequel to Coven. Um, and it's unfortunate that the way
Uh,
that it's set up on Netflix that you watched it in reverse because
I'm
once
trying to
you
get
get
the
through
connection with Coven.
once you get through the apocalypse, right, and they end up at the outpost where the underground bunker and everything,
Yeah.
right, and
Mm-hmm.
then the witches show
But
up.
that's the beginning of it, though.
That's
Yeah.
the beginning. No, that's not the beginning.
No, that's really the beginning of the because they go through the what happens because of the apocalypse,
Right.
and now
So
they
so so
underground.
then you go back and it tells you the story of like how we got to the apocalypse.
Right.
Right. And the whole issue with the male, the warlock school and the kid who's the antichrist who is the kid from Murder House,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's at the warlock school. They think that he is because he's the antichrist and they don't know it. They
Mm-hmm.
think that his power is basically like it was like it brought men into the whole witchcraft thing through the
Yeah.
warlock school.
Warlock. Mm-hmm.
They were petitioning for him to be the first male supreme. The witches from Coven figured out what was going on and basically like cast some type of spell to protect themselves so that
Yeah.
they can come back. So like it literally is
It's bits and pieces of things, but I
it's
was getting more.
it's a sequel to Coven. And when you put it in that perspective, it makes sense because otherwise you're right. It does. It feels like
Is
it's
it the
out
sequel
of
or is
place.
it like the pre-episode to
So
Coven?
a little, so then if you look at it like that, a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that it's the sequel and that it's literally the eighth episode versus the third, but a lot of what happens, I think, predates what the events of what we saw in Coven.
And Coven. I was thinking this one season made me think of what was the black TV series that came out. Ah, I cannot think of it. It was about the Green Book and was it called the
No,
Green
Green
Book?
Book. There was a movie that came out called
It
Green
was a
Book.
TV show. It wasn't a movie.
Oh, Lovecraft Country.
Lovecraft Country. That's what this what that episode this season made me think about. It made me think about that because remember it was still they weren't warlocks, but it was more masonry organizations. But that's
No,
what made me. That's why I
I,
said it kind of lent itself to this series because I could see the elements that it kind of took from a couple different seasons, but it just didn't. Beyond that, it didn't fit in, and it's really sometimes how the seasons open up that take you into a different direction, and then you get to see how it connects to other seasons.
Yeah.
So that was it. Just threw me off with the whole
Yeah, because
apocalypse stuff.
I don't think that the witches from Coven show up until probably like the fifth or sixth episode.
Yeah.
'Cause the first, at least
Mm,
the first three or four
yeah.
episodes, maybe episode four. But I know the first few episodes, everybody, I think the whole point was everybody was like, "What the fuck is going on?" Right?
Yeah.
Like everybody was kind of in the dark around like what the point was or
Because
what
I
was
know
gonna.
I was in the dark. If
Yeah.
characters were, I know I was because I was like,
Mhm.
okay, so this thing happens, and
So then
somehow
when the
there's a secret
witches,
bunker.
so the witches that we're first introduced to in Coven, Sarah Paulson,
Uh huh.
Vera Farmiga, and the one who I can't think of her name, but in Coven she was the one who they tried to burn at the stake because she was a necromancer, like she could bring things back from the dead. The
Yeah.
three of them show up, and then you get the backstory of how the Antichrist rose to power through the warlock ranks, how they
Mhm.
were trying to petition for a male supreme, which is the supreme witch or the ruler of that world. Um, yeah, so like if you hadn't seen Coven, then yeah, like everything about Apocalypse was just gonna seem weird and out of place. I
Right.
think that it changes the perspective when you put it in line with Coven. It changes the whole perspective because even if you haven't seen Coven, when those three witches show up, you still are kind of in the dark. It kind of hinges on you knowing who those three are in order to like advance the story.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It was just it definitely was a sidestep from everything else. It has its fit in or its tie in rather, but it was definitely a sidestep from everything else that was
Hmm.
going on.
Yeah.
And how
And
it jumped
I
forward.
think sometimes that's needed. And also, like, like I think that as the American Horror Story goes on, if they continue to go on, I think that you don't want to retread the same ground. And I think it's getting to a point where when you think about what makes sense in the context of this type of show, um, I don't want to say they're running out of ideas, but it gets. I think the longer it goes on, the more difficult it is to stay original,
Well,
right?
I think when they did
And
the
stay
the
good
cult,
and stay good. I
right? When
don't
they
like
did
the
cult,
original part
I
isn't
think that
bad.
kind of I think cult lent itself to them finding a way to stay relevant,
Uh-huh.
but also allow them to, it gave them an open door to be able to like the whole was it Roanoke, allowing them to step into the present.
Hmm.
Apocalypse allowed them to, connect the future to where we are. Like I think they still had wiggle room to play. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm only imagining, how this whole quarantine situation um will play into the next season. Like
Yeah,
how much
because
of that will
I don't think they've announced it yet, but it'd be just our luck if it's like American Horror Story Contagion. You know what I'm saying? Like
I mean,
that
well,
would
they
be
went there with Colt, so
right in line with what they've done in the past.
yeah. But I think that will be the thing that keeps them, moving forward. It will be the whole, thing that allows them to have more content to be able to play with and tie into what they've already done. Because that's the part that I like about it. It's so steeped in history. There's so many history elements in this that history, we got parts of history. I mean, they've only gone back as far as slavery. So, you know, that's just like the beginnings of this country. I would love to see them go to a different country, or travel somewhere else and do something like with you know I would love to see them do something with like Hitler, or you know that's where I
I'd
see
like to
this
see them
being
do
able to go
something.
to.
I'd like to see them do something with zombies. I'd like to see them, because I know they have the ability to be original and kind of attack certain things from
Mhm.
a different perspective. I would love to see their take on zombies, right? And we've seen
But
zombies
wasn't that
before in
what
the series.
Roanoke was? Wasn't that what Roanoke was?
Nah. Roanoke was just like
Not necessarily the idea of a zombie,
spirit.
but yeah, but that was still like every year under this moon, like these people rise up and attack.
Uh,
It,
Roanoke.
remember the whole purpose of what was attacking them was,
Yeah,
that lady who was the baker, the baker
yeah.
lady,
But
like.
I felt like she was more like some type of witch. Like I don't know. They kind of characterized her as this like ancient spirit. But
Well, it was
I
a it
always
was
looked at her
a
as
it was
kind
a
of like a
spirit
witch.
from the past who died. That land was already theirs, and the fact that they haunted the land, so they were
Yeah,
haunting it. So every year,
right. Like the land was theirs. They
right,
come back
her
every
and
year.
her
Yeah. No,
her and
I'm
her
talking about
team.
the typical like zombies. You know what I'm saying? Like
Right.
I'd like to see a season around like a zombie apocalypse or
That's what I thought Apocalypse was going to be. I thought that's what was about to happen. I was like,
mhm.
so then this Apocalypse, and they being all catered to this, this one underground bunker. Was it was allegedly all over the world. There was one all over the world, but that's what I saw. But
Yeah.
I told you about the series about the black people in in Germany doing Hitler's time. So that's why
Hmm.
I was like, I see them doing that or going somewhere in Asia,
Yeah.
anywhere where there's a tribal culture where they can tie in, voodoo or witchcraft or
But see, that's what I feel
spiritual.
like witchcraft and voodoo they've done before. I don't know how often you can keep doing it. Like they're gonna get away with doing the witches a couple times because I think that they're the more
Well, that's
popular
common.
characters throughout the series.
Well, that's in that, but we see witchcraft and voodoo throughout history. That's why I said it's so steeped in history because we just dealt with America. That's what I'm saying. Like I see them going to another country or tackling other, other parts of history in terms of wars or uh I see so many elements where it's tied into it that it can happen, like the origins of voodoo, like taking us back to that moment. Like I just see them being able to travel through time, or
Way more optimistic than me.
I mean, just
I don't
seeing
have
what
that type
they've
of
done.
TV.
But it looks like it's a lot of like the same stuff, but because it overlaps and it connects so many different things to current day, to the past, and now they've dealt with the future. So it is an open door to either one of those paths to kind of dig a little bit deeper. I think they
Mhm.
have something. I don't see this going on for like 20 years, but
They've been renewed. I mean, the 10th season is coming, and they've been renewed for 3 more after that.
right.
So they're renewed now through 13 seasons.
If they keep going, jumping, and not trying to be so methodical or intentional, I think they'll have a longer life expectancy than what than what
Mhm.
you're probably giving them right now. But I think we have one more left.
That's not me giving them. I'm saying like they're in the middle of filming, and then
Right.
January or February of this year, like FX announced that they have renewed it for another 3 seasons. So as it stands right now, contractually, they are good through season 13 and maybe beyond, you know, depending on how these next 4 seasons go.
Mhm.
So the final season, 1984, which is really just a throwback to the slasher genre, the slasher movies of the early 1980s.
Yeah.
That really kind of like defined the horror genre for the next couple decades. So they tackled this subject matter. I never thought that you could do something like that where like you're so clearly I just never would have thought that someone could have made that interesting in 2019.
Well,
um I don't
well,
think it's one of the stronger seasons. Um
mm,
but I enjoyed it.
I
I definitely enjoyed it.
right. This made me want to watch all the other seasons. So like I said, I started watching this before we said we was going to add this to this. Even I started watching this before we even did this podcast. And the reason I continued to watch was because I watched this season first.
Mm-hmm.
And it was crazy because I saw it advertised somewhere, or I saw like something mentioning it, and I watched it, and this was it felt very like something that I would have watched before. This is the type of TV that I would have watched at some other point. This was like the cheesy season where it was like the cheesy horror story, like
Uh-huh.
slasher. Slasher to me is very cheesy because it's very girl. You don't see him coming, and now you run. Oh, now you gonna fall. Okay,
Yeah,
now I see it. But it turned even it was like a spoof on that, and
yeah.
it turned it on its side a little bit in terms of them being, if you die here, you stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really the only monkey wrench in it was them adding what's the young lady from Pose. They added that character in it,
Yeah.
and it was like, they just wanted to add another black person to this, so they just gave this person this storyline. It did seem like they was adding elements that didn't need to be there, but or they didn't really flush out that person's storyline enough. But
Right.
I love because I don't know if you ever went to away camps. I went to away camps. So this was really like, it was scary because in my mind, like, would this had happened to me? Would I have been victim of
Right.
this?
Have fallen at the most inconvenient.
Right. Like, would I been the person that was up trying to get, a midnight snack, which I was, sneaking into the commissary.
Right.
And I would have been the one who saw the murderer. But
Yeah.
I loved this, like I said, a lot of these, because this was Roanoke.
Mhm.
This was so that's why I'm saying all these settings kind of tied into each other,
Mhm.
and I just love just the element of how it went backwards and who we thought was the killer, and how these these people was trapped on this land.
Yeah.
Remember the mother who was trapped because her son was killed, and then
Do you,
he wound
you
up
know,
killing himself. And
do you think I wonder so first of all, I agree with everything that you said. Like I didn't think that anybody could tackle that subject matter as well
yeah,
as they did. Like
and not make it
and
cheesier.
not make it cheesier, right? Like you know what I'm saying? And even because of a lot of the things that we, like a lot of our feelings around um um the 80s horror flicks at this point, right?
Yeah.
And it's like so to watch them subvert some of that and really make it
Wasn't this more this was the
wow.
70s or was it the 80s? I thought this was 70s.
No,
Or I think it overlapped. I think it
1984. I
overlapped.
think it overlaps too. I mean, it's set
Yeah.
in 1984.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the movie time period that it covers it probably overlap like late 70s, early
Yeah.
80s and
Mhm.
beyond. But one of the things that kind of uh that I did not care for was the idea of them people who died there staying there as ghosts.
That was
That was
hilarious. That part was hilarious to me.
and I thought that was funny. I did, and they did make it funny, but I just felt like it was a redone trope. Considering that that's exactly what happened with Murder House, right?
Yeah.
Like that was the whole premise of Murder House. Was like if you died in the house, then you then became a spirit occupying the house. Um,
Yeah, but you got something. I think you had to kill somebody to get something. If you like wanted to take the money out the house, you had to kill somebody. Or if you wanted to take the child out the house, you had to kill like it was something of that nature.
no, it was just everybody who died. Like a lot of the backstory in Murder House was of the ghosts that were there, and
Yeah.
most of them just died in the
Got
house.
trapped there, yeah. They got
Like it,
trapped.
it opens with the two boys who are like playing in the house, and
Mm-hmm.
the daughter from next door is like, "You gonna regret it. You're gonna regret it." Like she
Yeah.
told them, like you're gonna die in there, and they did. And then you see them later in the season, like in the basement where they were murdered. You know what I mean? Like, and they were murdered by a ghost in the house.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah. Um, but no, 84, and I have to actually make an amendment because earlier I was saying that Coven and Asylum were the two highest
Mhm.
rated seasons so far, but actually that is incorrect. 1984 is their most critically acclaimed season.
For it to be the last one so far. Or the
Mhm.
last one.
Yeah, it is. It is their most. I
It
mean,
was
like
it was
it has the.
But it was everything, especially if you was an 80s baby or if you grew up watching, television in the 80s. Like this was everything, wrapped up into one. And it just gave so much. It was the, slasher and rocker stories and just even the blood and the gore was a little bit different. To me, the whole idea of you being killed there, you're gonna stay there. It was hilarious. The girl having sex with the black guy that was dead, like her having sex
Mhm.
with him and him not realizing he was dead. Like that
Right.
was the funny part to me, and them being this the cycle of them being dead and being tired of being dead. The whole idea of them
Yeah, it was a
killing
lot of
that I
enjoyable
think
moments.
the Satan worshiper, like them going years in rotation of all of them taking a post and killing him and keeping him dead. Like it was hilarious because it was more of a this felt like the spoof season. Like they were spoofing all of those 70s, 80s horror flicks. That's what
Mhm.
it felt like. And then that whole idea, I loved them being in the camp, the away camp.
Yeah.
Like it was just, because it was always like that cheesy camp leader
Yep.
that just, you just thought she was crazy and a little off. Like
Mhm.
this was familiar to me. So I
Yeah.
I loved it. And I can see why it
Yeah.
became the most, the
Yeah.
well rated show out of all of them because it was the most. It felt more interactive. It felt,
Well, we're nostalgic for the 80s.
yeah,
We
yeah.
are. And if you know
I think his sound went out. Are you there? I think his sound went out, so we wait for him to come back. But I love this season. I loved the nod to the '80s, late '70s, early '80s. I loved anything in that time period. It was so many different nods to um uh that time and how they happened on how everything happened. It just really let me just make sure he good. Oh, oh, his thing must have died. But I've really I loved this season. I loved how uh everything was playing on itself. And here you go, and came back.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, what happened? But
I had a little technical difficulty. I kicked out for a second. Um, but no, what I was saying was like we're nostalgic for the 80s. And
yeah,
and a lot of stuff, if you've been paying attention, a lot of stuff now is being framed or set in the 80s.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so like Christmas Day, we got Wonder Woman coming out, and it's Wonder Woman 84 because it's set in 1984, right? Like,
yeah.
one of the the last X-Men movie was set in the 1980s, right? Like, um,
I think this
yeah, like,
series in general became a trendsetter because you start seeing things
oh
kind of
yeah, definitely.
be built off of it. That's why in the beginning I brung up and Ratchet and Bates Motel series.
Mhm.
That's that miniseries that came out. And even Lovecraft Zone. Like I just feel like a lot of stuff not mimicked this series, but just
Mhm.
played off of a lot of the storytelling and a lot of the elements of storytelling. And it
Well,
was really
one of the
good
things,
themes.
I think American Horror Story showed that there was a substantial market for this type of material, right?
Hmm. Right.
Because we talked about all 9 seasons so far, and one of the things that we really haven't gone into is just how mature some of these themes are. Like even in the seasons um that may not be as strong as some others, they have really pushed the envelope as far as what you get in like a network television show. And
Mm,
they've been doing it pretty much since the start. And
right.
I think that what you're talking about is absolutely true. I think that they opened the door for a lot of those shows that you've mentioned, as
Hmm.
well as a lot of these shows now. I feel like you can go every third channel and find a show about witches.
Hmm.
And all of a sudden it's not done from like, I mean, they even remade Sabrina the Teenage Witch in the
But it's
vein
dark.
of like in the vein of the blueprint that Coven set. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Whereas though it
Everything is
was a
like dark.
teen angst type of thing, but it was much darker, and
Mhm.
it approached the subject material in a much different and I think more mature way. And
Right.
I think American Horror Story uh had a lot to do with that.
Hmm.
Um
Even the somebody had did a spoof on Will Smith, Fresh Prince of Bel Air, and made it dark. But you could tell they were inspired by American Horror Story because it became a dark comedy versus this upbeat comedy that it was before. But it everything I feel like a lot of stuff that came during this run or after it
mhm.
really
Yeah.
like started mimicking the time periods or the content, like you said. But yeah, I saw that Sabrina. It was like everything can't be dark. Like now the reboots are
I,
now will be dark.
I mean, I'm okay. Like, I don't know if it was. I mean, it's certainly dark if you're comparing it to
But it was.
the original TV
Yeah.
show, but that's
Mhm.
really not what it was, though. And see, that's the thing, is that there's stuff that's becoming dark and like intentional, like,
Right.
oh, like, let's be dark because that's the thing to do. And then there's things that, like in Sabrina's case, it wasn't so much of a like, oh, let's be dark. It was a let's return to the source material, right?
Hmm.
Like, so the source material is not Sabrina. Like, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the original TV show, was a very watered down version of the not the graphic novel of
Hmm.
Sabrina. You know what I'm saying? So that they just went back to the source material and they said, like,
Right.
let's tell a story right. And it was darker material. They actually lightened it up for TV. I think that what you find is, like, I think it's not so much about light and dark. I think most I think we were introduced to a lot of things through a series of time periods in a very lighthearted way because
Right.
of the subject matter. Like people didn't feel like, and they were right. Like you could not have produced like an American Horror Story in 1970 for like regular TV. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like everything comes along in its due time, and I don't think that it's really a it's not like an intentional like let's be dark to be dark. I think that let's tackle the subject matter truthfully and let's attack it like in a mature way. And
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about witches, well, let's talk about witches and let's talk about it from the historical context. Let's not dress it up in all of this hocus pocus, but let's talk about what it really is and what it represents, right? Um, if in the same thing with like vampires and in all ranges of things. I
Mm-hmm.
think that we're at a place now where we realize there's a little something for everybody. So when these types of situations come up, when we want to tackle this particular type of subject matter, well, we don't have to shy around it and turn it into a comedy or like dress it up with all this stuff that's like kid friendly, because we can, there's places where this market exists. And I think
Mm-hmm.
American Horror Story opened up a market, or they shone light on a market that before that I don't know if people really understood existed.
Mm.
So
Yeah, I agree. But
that's my
this
take on that.
this series in general was really an interesting binge watch for me. It was
Mhm.
very interesting. It
Of course,
really
it's interesting. You
kept my
watching it
attention.
backwards.
Yeah, it really captured my. Well, they should have had it face it the other way,
Yeah, I know,
but
right? Like
but
I
it
like
really
that's crazy.
but it really just was. It was an interesting and kept my attention, and it I love storytelling for the sake of storytelling and really telling a story and really having elements in it that are useful, that are informative, that are historical, culturally based, socially based. And that's kind of what binge worthy podcast is. And I think this series, American Horror Story, really captured a lot of the things that we kind of try to discuss here on Binge Worthy Podcast. Just all of those elements were definitely played. I love the fact that it wasn't just a bunch of new faces every season, or it allowed characters to kind of carry roles on it or recreate themselves. This was a great season for actors. I mean, this whole series was a great series for actors to really show their range and their depth. And a lot of seasoned actors got to showcase themselves, and then you had some newer actors got to kind of show and shift themselves in different spaces. But I love the fact that these seasoned actresses, women, got to really, when are you going to get Kathy Bates, Angela Bassett, um, Jessica Lange? When are you going to see all of them together, like beating each other up, fighting and whatnot?
Yeah.
Like, where else are you going to see that at? So
Mhm.
they must have. I know they paid a lot of money for them. I know Jessica Lange, Kathy Bates, and Angela Bassett
Yeah.
probably garnered, probably stacked a couple bags doing this. But I love seeing them in this element and
Hmm.
being able to do different things. I know Angela Bassett. This was kind of like a playground for her. I've seen several interviews with her, and it was like this was like a playground for her because she got to be different things at different times.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, no, it's definitely like I envy these actors sometimes
Mhm.
because it's
Yeah.
like like to work like that. It's almost like being a part of a theater company. You know what
Right.
I mean? And you
Right.
just come back to the next show and you're a whole different character and you get to just, whatever happened in the last show is like, okay, we're done with that. And then we're moving on to the next challenge.
Right.
Um, so I know that this had to be like incredibly fun to work on for them.
Yeah.
Um, so But yeah, that's that on that American Horror Story, man. If y'all ain't seen it, you need to get up on it.
Yeah,
Need to check it
definitely.
out. Nick,
So
you
this
want to sign us off? Let the people know where they can find us.
so this is episode 9 in our series. We have one more episode to go. We'll be going live on January the 5th with our final season, covering our final production. I may try to slide in a little, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom somewhere. We may do a special episode on that one, but possibly we don't know
We
yet.
need to.
Uh, but uh, but
We
yeah,
might
you
need to
can
do
find
like a
us.
30-minute. We might need to
Yeah,
do like a 30-minute lunch break.
right, and I'm for it. Just let me know. But you
All
can
right.
find us on Facebook, YouTube, well, Facebook and Instagram under uh, Bingeworthy Podcast, and you can find us on YouTube as well as Twitter at the Artist Exchange, which is kind of the umbrella of Bingeworthy Podcast. And we new episodes every Tuesday. We're gonna take a break after the 5th, and we'll be right back at the top of February with a whole new season, all new themes, all new guests. Uh, we had 2 phenomenal guests this season, Jacob Mayberry and Miss Michelle Weeks. So definitely we're going to have more guest hosts stopping by, more thematic series. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on our Facebook, our YouTube, and our Instagram page. Let us know what you want to watch. Let us know who we are. And if you didn't catch that at the bottom, our Cash App, Blueprints, please help support the show. We need your support. We want your support. I want your support because this is what we're doing for you all, and we want to hear from you. You know, whether you liked it or not, what you want to see us talk about in season 2 as we begin to plan for it. And that's been Bingeworthy Podcast, episode 9.
See y'all later.
See you
Y'all have a
later.
good night.